Edge designations, CFA Level 1, pre-reading financial statement analysis, learning module 9, applications of financial statement analysis. And again, just to note, I know we've noted this many times before, being in the pre-reading section, this particular learning module, application of financial statement analysis, will find its way again then into the core readings when we get to those. So obviously we do handle this, I suppose, twice. Learning outcomes for learning module number 9, here they are on the front page. And what we're looking at, this is almost like a conclusion type learning module for both pre-reading and for the core readings, where we take a look then, guys, at how everything ties together and how we can apply the financial statement analysis that we've done to the results that we've seen from a company. Okay, and let's get going straight away. Not an overly complicated nor long learning module. Learning module 9, applications of financial statement analysis. Okay. Evaluate a company's past financial performance and explain how a company's strategy is reflected in their past financial performance. Okay. In the previous learning module, we had a look at some ratio analysis. Okay. We looked at various things like profitability, leverage, solvency, operational efficiency, etc. When I analyze past performance, we do that for cross-sectional analysis. We can compare between different companies, okay, and by looking at the past performance of the company, it also gives us a bit of a forward look as well as to what needs to be done going forward. Okay, some factors that we need to look at, guys. What aspects of performance are critical for a company to succeed? How did the company perform relative to those critical aspects? What are the company's business model and strategy? And how do they influence the performance of the company? We look at sales growth, efficiency, profitability, etc. First and foremost, we look how to forecast a company's future net income and cash flows, which is a very good place to forecast because it'll give us a good indication of income as well as the cash balances of the company. A good place to start off is looking at GDP growth. In other words, we look from a macro point of view first, top down, and say, well, what is the economy likely to do? Okay, and then once we've got that, then we can look at the relationship between the industry that our particular company is, their sales, and the growth in GDP. Okay, and then we can take it one micro level even further, and then compare that then to the company, our own specific company's sales. And let's have a look over here, top of page 3. Forecast sales for the upcoming year is 100 million. In the past, cost of goods was 30% of sales. Operating expenses were 50% of sales, and taxes forecast then at 40%. Okay, and you can come and give yourself a nice income statement forecast. Sales 100 million, which we would have got probably from looking at GDP numbers, industry numbers, and then extrapolating those downwards towards our specific company. Cost of goods is 30% of revenue. Operating expenses 50% of revenue, giving me 30 million and 50 million respectively. Net profit before tax is 20 million. Taxes is 40% then of that, 8 million. And I project myself a $12 million profit for the year. Looking at a cash flow forecast, okay, remember cash flow and net income are completely different. Net income is the accounting side of the profit. Cash flow will result in how much cash actually came in of that 12 million into my business. Okay. When you're looking to do a cash flow forecast, certain things you need to look at as well. How much working capital is there? Investment in fixed assets. Was any debt issued or repaid? Was any equity issued or repaid? These are other questions that need to be asked when looking to try and do a cash flow forecast. And these items can be estimated also then as a percentage then of sales. The two major, there's many, but there's two major parties that look or analyze the financial statements of a company. The firstly, those that like to get involved and perhaps make an investment in the equity of a company, okay? But there's also those that look at it from a credit point of view. In other words, if a bank stroke financial institution is looking to give a loan to a financial company, okay, then they will look also, okay, at the set of financial statements, but they will look at it, okay, from the point of view then of a credit quality, okay, and they're going to look at it from the following. We always call these the different C's, okay. A credit analyst will look at the 4 different C's. What are those? Character. In other words, we look at the quality of management, okay. They'll look at strategic direction, philosophy, financial philosophy at least, conservatism, the track record of management, succession planning, and control systems in place, okay. They will also look at capacity, okay. Does the issuer, does the company have the ability to make payments? In order to look at that, what will they look at? Okay, industry trends, regulatory environment, okay, basic operating and competitive position, financial position and sources of liquidity, company structure, parent support agreements, and any kind of special event risk. Other C's that we look at, of course, are collateral. What kind of assets does this company have that they can pledge as collateral or security? And covenants. What's a covenant? A covenant is a restriction on the company that is lending the money, okay, to the issuer, and it talks about the limitations and restrictions that will then be placed by the lender then onto the borrower. We've got affirmative covenants. These are things that the borrower has to do. It's got to pay interest, they've got to pay principal at certain time periods, etc., etc. And there are negative covenants as well. Negative covenants are things that they're not allowed to do. For example, the borrower can't raise more debt until this first amount of debt is repaid, or things like that. Okay. Often you get rating agencies that will also look at the quality then of the issuer. They look at things like scale and diversification, operational efficiencies, margin stability, okay, and leverage. Leverage is the amount of earnings in relation to the amount of debt, okay, and of course the greater the amount of earnings in relation to debt, okay, the better then, yes, the credit rating. Okay. Now we look at use of financial statements in terms of equity investments, okay. And if you're now trying to say to yourself, well, I've got 10 companies in front of me, I'm not really sure which one I would like to invest in, okay, you can use what we call a screening process, okay, and we can use many different ratios, things like EBITDA ratios, earnings ratios, and things like that, gross profit ratios, to help us determine which is the best investment to make out of the whole set of companies that I've got, okay. An analyst that wants to see how a portfolio would have performed, okay, he says, well, okay, I think my best thing to look at is price earnings ratios or anything like that. What he does is he back tests. In other words, he's going to use price earnings as a particular metric that he believes to be important in the analysis, and he applies that particular screening process stroke metric backwards to the portfolio to see what results he would have got from this particular company using this particular strategy. Okay, just to remember, there are some limitations of using a backward strategy, because remember certain things. The first one always to remember, guys, of course, is that results that happen in the past may not necessarily be a good indicator of what will happen in the future. We also look at survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is, remember, when I look at companies and their results today, who are those? Those are called the survivors. Those are the ones that have been around and continue to be around. What about those that have died as a result of poor performance? Okay, those ones I'm not looking at. That could often be a problem, but I'm only really looking at the good ones, not the bad ones. Look ahead bias. Okay, often a company will restate its information that may have been incorrect, but when they do so, okay, they're already at a future point in their lives. Data snooping bias. Okay, and look at the word snooping. I'm building a model based on using future data. Okay, what's important to determine is which metrics I'm going to use. Is price earnings the correct metrics to see for value? Is earnings multiples the correct thing? Is EBITDA? Okay, and which weightings I'm going to place on the various metrics. Okay, I could use growth metrics. I'm focusing on high growth companies. I'm focusing on value companies, or for example market oriented companies, depending on what you decide to focus on, so you will give additional value. Okay, we look at framework for analysts adjustments. Okay, when an analyst comes to look at a balance sheet, he may want to do certain adjustments to that balance sheet to reflect what he believes to be more accurate. Okay, some key aspects that are relevant. We look at the materiality of the item. If the item that we're looking at may be incorrect according to the analyst or problematic, but it's not material, it's not important, okay, it wouldn't really matter. Okay, we look at the different body of standards. Are we using IFRS or US GAAP? Okay, methods. Are the companies being compared? I'm comparing two companies, one to the other. Are they using different accounting methods? And estimates. Remember, what are estimates that we talk about? Estimates are things like depreciation. Am I going to depreciate at 10% or 20%? Okay, and we need to be mindful of that when we compare the different companies. Areas where analysts can make adjustments. Investments. Okay, investments in debt and equity will depend then on management's intention of those. Okay, we know investments can be held, they can be actively traded, available for sale, or held to maturity. Okay, let's say for example a financial asset is measured at fair value through profit and loss. We know what happens. Any unrealized gains or losses go through the income statement. When they measure it through other comprehensive income, they don't go through the income statement, but they go through equity. Okay, and just make sure that you're aware of the differences where all the items are moving through the income statement to be able to make the relative adjustments that you require. Adjustments that might be made related to inventories. Remember, of course, guys, when I'm comparing two companies, we've got to make sure what cost systems they were using. One might have used LIFO, one might have used FIFO, and the third might have used weighted average. In order to compare the companies, we've got to make certain adjustments to make sure we are comparing like with like. What about property, plant, and equipment? What are some of the differences over here? Okay, remember, a big item for property, plant, and equipment is the depreciation expense that I reduce the value of my property, plant, and equipment by. Okay, the amount of the depreciation expense is dependent upon what method I use, and the estimate. Do I use a 10% estimate or a 20% estimate? Okay, and we saw all of this, by the way, guys, in the long-lived assets section. Okay, an interesting way, sometimes what analysts like to do is that there's certain relationships between various items. Okay, and when I look at those relationships, I can come to certain conclusions. What are some of those? Often they take accumulated depreciation, in other words, the total depreciation accumulated to date, and I divide that by my gross property, plant, and equipment, and that should tell me how much of the useful life has gone by. I could also go accumulated depreciation over depreciation expense, net property, plant, and equipment by depreciation expense. And you can see I've got all these various different ratios that I could use to try and approximate certain relationships. Let's look at this one. Gross property, plant, and equipment over depreciation expense shows the average life of the assets at inception. CapEx divided by gross PPE plus CapEx can indicate what amount or what percentage of the asset base is being renewed via capital investment. Okay. We've also got goodwill. Remember, guys, goodwill is an intangible asset generally arising as a result of paying too much or paying more for a company than the net assets that have been acquired. Okay, analysts must analyze the companies, okay, that have been purchased. Okay, if the numbers over there are presenting goodwill numbers that are too high, okay, just watch out for those, because that could also result in an issue. Okay, we could have two identical companies with completely different asset bases. Okay, and you could find some companies that have got just very high asset bases due to very high goodwill numbers. Okay, another company might be a very good company but just lower assets due to having expensed the items on their balance sheets. In order to compare two companies, often the following adjustments then need to be made. reverse all goodwill from the balance sheet before you start ratio analysis. Just get rid of it so you can compare like with like. And then if you take goodwill out of the balance sheet, take any goodwill impairments or other items then out of the income statement as well. Off balance sheet finance, there are certain times things like leases, capital leases and things like that. Okay, operating leases, that it's an effective way of getting your financing off balance sheet. And again, when you're comparing two companies, just make sure you're comparing like with like in your comparisons. Okay, top of page 8, we've got a bit of a summary for you. As mentioned, it's a relatively short learning module. It does get a little bit more in depth when you get to the core reading related to learning module 9. Here's a bit of a summary for you there, guys. And as per usual, we take you right back to the beginning and just ask you, please do have a look then at the various learning outcome statements and make sure you then are familiar with those and are able to answer questions then based upon those learning outcome statements. This brings us to a conclusion then of learning module 9, applications of financial statement analysis. Okay, and brings us then to a conclusion of the pre-readings related to financial statement analysis as a big section, 9 learning modules all in all.